All right, we are live. Welcome everybody. It is our
Hello.
24th stream today, which it really doesn't feel like it. I feel like we just started doing this like 3 weeks ago.
Mhm.
Definitely, definitely feels that way with pressing all the buttons and stuff. But
Yeah.
how are you guys? How are you guys doing today? Why don't we start off with Snow? Snow, how are you doing today?
Ah! Oh my gosh. So I'm getting ready for, first of all, we're still building our house. So that's why you don't see me yet. I'm finally getting but it's coming together. I'm going to have my own little studio, going to have a brand new backdrop and everything. It's going to be exciting. When you see it, you'll be like, oh, wow, this is worth it. But I have to get there first. And then I'm getting ready for the wedding. And I'm like, I want to do my hair. And so I have like this mud mix that I put on it. So right now you cannot see me, but I am covered in mud. My hair is off
Mhm.
of the beauty mud, which is just like actually in my book. It's in Hellraisers and Heartbreakers. There's a beauty mud, and part of that's based on the fact. If anybody who's ever used mud for their beauty, just let me know. It's like there's always these mud masks, and you can put the stuff in your hair with henna and all sorts of things. So I'm doing that right now while I'm on the air with you. I swear I'm going to be beautiful. It's going to be great. And then so I'm
Look at
getting
that.
ready for the wedding, and that's really exciting. My son is getting married, and so everything is just absolute total chaos. So I am coming to you right now, my oasis of serenity, James and Black Knight. Thank you, thank you. You all
All
are my
right.
peace, wild, wild world.
Well, we're
And you,
always glad that you can join us. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
and all my people in chat, I love you.
Yeah, thank you, chat, for joining us. I know we got about 5 people tuning in. Thank you
Woo!
all, 5
Yeah.
early on. But Black Knight, how are you doing today? How you doing?
I'm okay. A little bit tired.
Aw.
Still from the previous weeks where I was probably working a bit too late. So this week I have to do some cleaning and some other chores and prepare for the winter. And
Mm.
so I mostly go outside and deal with these chores before it's gets like freezing cold and stuff. Um, and so it's gonna be a bit less work writing wise and more chores, but it has to be done. Um, Even though I am doing these all of this, I still find some time to write. So today, as you know, in honor of Terran Tuesday, um, I'm composing poems, and it's either a haiku or the beefiest version of haiku tanka, the older one. So I wrote one, and yeah, of course, used all bits and pieces of the comments that my readers left me on my Sci Friday Vote Your Own Adventure story at the province of Terras, just like I promised. And today's tanka was about the space hamsters from Star Shuttle.
I need to write one about that.
Yeah, I tagged you. Yeah, so yeah, that's it about
Oh,
me.
that's good. That's a good way to spend the day. I've been busy just with work, and auspiciously enough, as I was editing a video for someone, it was a video all about weather and weather
Really
manipulation. We're
cool.
talking about weather today, and we chose this topic last week. Here we are talking about it today, and a lot's happened since then.
Or the
In
weather chose the topic.
No,
yeah,
no,
right.
no.
And that has definitely made this a much more pertinent topic in general. It's very in the know right now. Weather. But snow, you've always have an interesting thing to say about everything. What do you got for us regarding weather?
Well, today when we started off with talking about, so this is our subject. We didn't really pick it thinking there was going to be a hurricane right now, even though I kind of knew there was out there. This has been a very active as far as just the intensity of the season. So a lot of things going online actually fit right in with this. We are going to make a discussion a little bit about geoengineering, which some people call weather manipulation, but it's geoengineering. It's been around since the 1930s. It is a actual science that people have been involved with, and of course it fits right in. And some things may be controversial, so we will of course have our own opinions, and we'll have our facts, and then we're going to talk about how it fits in with writing. And the thing about weather is, and as Mark Twain says, everybody has something to say about the weather. It's not a trope to talk about weather. Weather is ambiance. It is the environment in which your people are in. You can actually have an indoor weather. It is what is around you, the atmosphere, the ground beneath you, the moisture in the air, or the dryness. It is where you are in this physical world and how it affects you. How the physical world is affecting you is basically weather. And so when we talk about this in stories, it's not a trope just to go, it was raining outside. This is how your characters are interacting with the world. If they're sitting in an air-conditioned box, like so many of us are, we have a tendency to forget that there's actually a world out there. And white room syndrome, which is when you write a story and it's just this blank room, which can be used to great effect. If you want to avoid white room syndrome, a great way to do it is to incorporate the weather, the atmosphere, and the dynamics of that are in your characters' lives, what they're doing on the ground. And the only way you can really write about it is to experience it. You need to get your feet wet with it. And I think that for so many people, the weather is arbitrary. They look up one day and it's just raining. They don't realize the extraordinary dynamics and the forces that are in play to create the world moment that we're living in right now, this weather. And how it happens all over the world. It comes in waves and actually travels across the globe. And we can see it coming sometimes weeks ahead. We can actually say, hey, we're going to be having this situation. There are several YouTubers I follow. Weatherman Plus is one of them. He does specifically the tropics. And so when I look at something happening out in the Gulf or something happening that might be taking place, I go to Weatherman Plus, and he's talking about the dynamics of what's happening just off the coast of Africa 3 weeks ago. And he'll be saying, we have this thing happening here and there's some dust in the atmosphere and it may break it up, or we have these clouds that are forming. And he'll talk about how it's going to travel across the Atlantic and the stages it may go through. And then there is a forecast involved. These are weeks away. There are Kelvin waves that actually take place across the world where there's this massive fluctuation of temperature and how it comes across the globe from west to east, and it literally just washes across, and you can see it coming. At least in the northern hemisphere, you see this wave that's in that pattern. And of course, in the southern hemisphere, it is different. It goes the opposite direction. So we have these incredible waves of power and temperature and this moisture that may show up, or sometimes it completely goes away. It sucks it out of the atmosphere, and you have these dry times when there's nothing comes in your area because there's a river of air that's pushing it away from you. So when we see those large global scale weather events and how they affect people weeks away, most of us don't see that. We only hear about it maybe a few days ahead of time. So it has the tendency to be a mystery. And sometimes we don't really want to write it in, but you can actually write a story that is dependent on the weather that surrounds your people, your characters. In Watcher the Dam specifically, I have weather. Texas, as we've said, Texas as a character in Watcher the Dam. And the weather in Texas is very extreme sometimes. Our summers can be brutally hot, winters can be brutally cold. We have extremes of dangerous storms in fall and spring that we're going to be entering our secondary serious weather season, which will be coming up, and we need to make sure that we're ready for that because it happens in the fall as well in Texas. So when you have these things incorporated into your story, when you use it, it can be used to great advantage, not as a trope where they're just talking about the weather, but instead how it is actually affecting your characters on the ground and in their lives, and maybe the way that they feel and the moods that they think, because it affects us that way. And there are so many ways that we can incorporate that. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about how you can get to more information, free information that is available to you, that you can take these courses and you can learn more about it. So when you want to write about those weathers that are taking place outside in your characters' lives, you can know a little bit more about it and describe it realistically for the area in which they are in or the world in which you live in. Even if it's fantasy, these things take place. It's physics and atmospherics, and it can be used anywhere, whether it's space or on Earth or on a completely different fantasy world. It's possible, and I would love to see what you guys have to say about it, because it's such an exciting part of my life as a Skywarn coordinator from my county, for my area, and I have a large weather board for WeatherNet. I'm thrilled to death to talk about it, and what we learned today can be used not only in stories, but it can be used to save our own lives as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But I'll turn it back over to you for right now.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty big thing there. Because one thing that came to mind when you're saying that is how weather around us can help define us. In a way, like where I live, it can get really, really hot, and with that comes particular living conditions and habits and things you do and don't do to sort of just exist in a climate where it's burning outside. You can literally cook an egg on a rock out there. So when it comes to storytelling, I think when you bring weather into it, that can really give sort of some constraints as well as provide some obstacles for your character to deal with, and maybe even bring them into some sort of character defining moments, because the weather can test them. The weather can, like you said, set a mood, make it very dramatic, or in the case where I am, it's scorching heat. Imagine what your character would be going through trying to accomplish a mission while trying to cross a vast area where it's just scorching hot. What does their skin feel like? How much does it burn them? So there's a lot of storytelling there you can draw, and it could, like you said, we talk about the weather, and it's not just talking about it, but it could also be the beginning of natural flowing conversation. There's actually it's a very dynamic tool a writer can use, because it breaches into a lot of these different areas. The weather can be hostile, therefore providing this unknown, unseen predator you may be able to create and bring the weather to life, like Stephen King's Storm of the Century. That's a pretty good book that really covers that topic and how it affects a lot of people. Exterior from history itself, because our history in general is just filled with various ecological events that would all fall underneath that banner of weather, because it's not just hurricanes and things of that nature. But Black Knight, I know you had something you wanted to say, so go ahead, drop it on us.
No. I'm my input will not be as of more of about like the current state of the science, the geoengineering, but more in the ways of the space the space weather, so to speak, because believe it or not, there is weather in space.
Go ahead.
It affects our weather. So
when I first started doing the weather, and let me say this right now, that first of all, we have our prayers out for those who are still suffering from the effects of Hurricane Helene, and for our friends and family that are over there. They're facing down Hurricane Milton. And this Hurricane Milton is an extraordinary storm right now. It's absolutely beautiful and terrifying to look at it from outer space as they fly over. Very symmetrical, beautifully filled in. It is perfect, and that's very scary because there's no slots. There's no way for dryer to come in and disrupt that. And we can pray that maybe it'll be during Grady, but right now it's a Category 5. And I wanted to just say that right now, that this is not just something that we're talking about, because we're trying to be flip about it. This really does. Weather can destroy and create all at the same time. The Earth is a giant engine, and it has heat sinks, and that's what a hurricane is. It basically you have heat transferring from one level to another, and it creates a drain that takes it from one level to another, and that's why that occurs. And it goes over hot water, and it makes this happen. We have El Nino and we have La Nina, which are the Southern Oscillation, Southern Pacific Oscillation, and that actually where the water gets hotter or colder because it comes in and it suddenly has a cold spell, and it affects the weather in central Texas, for instance, where it becomes very dry often during the La Nina, where it's when the weather's cold, when the water is cold in the Pacific off of the coast of Peru. The central Texas air will be dry in the summer because it's sucking out that moisture, it's moving it to a different place. The jet stream actually changes. And Black Knight is absolutely correct. When I started my group for Limestone WeatherNet, which I have on Facebook, and it's just for my local storm spotters, I tell them what's happening. I would talk about space weather and how these sun flares will actually affect the Earth's weather. And I actually had people say, well, we don't do astrology. This is not astrology. This is astronomy. I'm serious.
No, the sun is not real, guys. It's just a light bulb over there. Like it's doing nothing. It just glows.
It's enormous effect. It just even the cooling, the sun, it affects the Earth. It's no other way to say it.
It affects everything.
It does, and so you have extraordinary. We go through high cycles and low cycles with the sun. You have the sun on an 11-year cycle. It's called a solar cycle. This is solar cycle 24 that we're in right now, and we have this extraordinary engine of heat, and it affects the Earth because it heats the oceans, and the oceans become the heat. And
it's not just the heat. People forget that it's like the magnetic fields.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have, you may hear us drop it in and out. We had a strong geomagnetic storm last night because there's sun flare. So all of these things affect this enormous engine of Earth, the dynamics of heat flowing, because it's flowing from one place to the next. It has to go somewhere. It's hard to describe. It's an energy. Heat is part of energy, and as a result, when we see heat, it's because things are moving, things are taking place. And so this extraordinary science of meteorology isn't just about Earth, it's about the sun, it's about space. And so all of these things flow together. And when you're writing for your audience and they're maybe not sure about it, now one of the things I had to do is I had to educate people on why a sun flare might affect Earth, not just because of the radio interference, but also because it does affect weather. It can change things on this Earth. Geomagnetic forces.
I can't imagine you just like facing someone who's like, we don't deal with astrology here, and you're like, you little shit. Let me tell you.
But here's the sad part about it. This wasn't some yokel in the backwoods that said that. That was actually a person that was studying meteorology. And because they were so wrapped around a certain ideology, they could not accept that the sun might affect the ocean, so it would create a problem. And of course, this person was not completely, didn't have their degree yet, things like this, so maybe they really didn't know. But this was supposed to be a person that was more educated. I can go to my people here in my county who may have never been to college, but they look up and they see the sun and they know it makes things hot. And they know that when hot water gets hot, it affects the way that the moisture rises. I don't have to explain it to them. I have to explain it to somebody who has never actually lived been outside, who has not actually been. And
in this case, they've never touched grass, they've never touched soil, they've never touched sand, they've never touched anything.
But it's true, and it's really hard. I love the fact that James has been outside, that he knows what this environment that he's living in is like. And this is actually a great struggle that we have. It's not, they are not to blame. The Zoomers are not to blame for what is happening to them. They have been kept inside. They've been put inside. They've been kept in little air-conditioned boxes, and they weren't allowed to go out. And for 2 years, they couldn't even take off a mask to see if somebody's smiling. We are to blame for that. we are to blame because that said the earth is too dangerous. Well, yes, it's a dangerous, terrible place sometimes. We just have to look at our friends out in the Appalachian area to see how dangerous this world is, how cruel it can be. But that means we go out with them. We lead the way. Take your little friend by the hand and say, you know what? It's time for us to go outside. Let's go outside. Let's see the earth as it is. Let's just sit and be uncomfortable. Let's work on a ranch or work on a farm, or let's go outside and just sit in the grass. How many of you have ever sat in the grass at night? Get close to the soil as you can, and you just sit and feel the moisture condensing, creating the dew. This used to be a common thing where people would go outside and just sit and watch the fireflies. Now we lock ourselves in our houses because we are afraid, and we have a right to be afraid. But we also have a right to experience the earth, and we need to do it. We have to break free of the box that holds us in and go out and experience this world in whatever way we can. And if we have to do it in numbers, if we have to create a space where we can, then we should. That little patch of grass, that little piece of ground that you can go to, that you can touch, it becomes one of the most important connections you will ever have in your life. That is of human to earth.
Powerful stuff indeed.
Yes.
Absolutely. It's hard to follow up on that one, but that brings in more of the mystical side of weather as well, that you might find and do find in a lot of pieces of literature. Like once again, we go to Stephen King's The Storm of the Century, which I think has also been adapted into like a television show as well as a movie, which shows you how powerful that can be, But the interesting thing I think of, one thing of weather and what it is, like the thing you brought up is the danger. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot, is how in the modern era, people kind of forgot why we built all this around us and what it's meant to do. Society is, everything we build around us is at first to protect us from what the world is, and then we just start building things to make us more comfortable. And I think one great thing we forgot is the danger of weather itself. We just think of the animal prowling in the dark or the stranger you don't know when it comes to the dangers, but weather is a big one. And I think that's one thing that living in a hot climate has kind of kept in people, that everybody's very weary about when they go outside, and everybody always walks around with a bottle of water, or there's a local locations that are just specifically meant for literally cooling down, like a lot of public buildings that have a little section for people to get out of the heat. And all this builds up culture. It builds up a culture builds up a culture based around the restrictions of both your body and what the weather can possibly do to your body. And that, I think, isn't actually explored too much in many of the modern day literature in itself. Like, yes, we have this horrible hurricane on its way, and we just had these massive floods that look like it's going to take weeks, if not months, to really figure out, what's happening down there due to the catastrophic damage. But strictly on a writing perspective, weather in itself could be probably, like, this is kind of an interesting aspect of it. It could be that the most Lovecraftian and dangerous thing there is. When I say Lovecraftian, take away the entity. I'd say it's maybe even scarier, because you take Lovecraftian and it's these entities that are bigger than life, that are godly, that you cannot, that you're so small in comparison. But what weather is, say, is a terrible storm on its way. You're essentially ripping away anything other than this is natural beyond belief. And I think that's where the absolute horror of it can come into play, which obviously a lot of people are seeing today. I'm like trying to juggle the reality of people's situations with the inspiration that weather can bring for fiction there, which is a little difficult to do, but hey, I'm giving it a try. There's my little piece there for you.
Oh,
Yeah, that was great. I mean, you're right, James. Especially in some of the old Slavic tales, weather is actually it's like it's almost um, it's almost made into an entity on itself, meaning you have the wind, you have the rain, you have the heat, the smoke, even everything. Almost everything is anthropomorphized. So I I liked a couple of the oldest stories. And I think one of them had Baba Yaga, and she was actually uh, negotiating with the smoke. She was negotiating with the smoke. I mean, she's powerful, but she
oh
was
yeah.
negotiating with the smoke. And said smoke came from a forest fire. She was
Ooh.
negotiating with it because the forest fire was started by lightning, and lightning was described as this entity that had it wasn't a god. It was like probably mightier than the gods. Um, it it went mad and began like a rampage of destruction across the lands, and pretty much no one was spared. And so Baba Yaga was negotiating with the smoke from the forest fire, so she could escape and save her magic house, like this
Oh yeah.
strange house that walks around on giant chicken legs.
No, I love that house.
Yeah, so yeah, this is something that we, as you both said, after building so much stuff around us and creating so much comfort, we have forgotten how deadly weather is. Even the rain, even the simple rain. I've been out in the forests, and if some people who have never went trekking and have just like watched Hollywood movies or movies in general, and they see these warm footage of a warm forest with the sun shining. No, forest is actually cold, and when it rains, it gets colder, and it's quite wet, and you could die easily. So this is like the this is the other side of the coin, like the oppressive heat and it its effects on your body and your culture and even the buildings that were built. And then you go to the forest, and suddenly everything is flipped. Plus, you have other things to worry about, because even though it's quite wet and cold at certain moments, occasions, everything can just it's a bonfire waiting. It's just a huge bonfire everywhere you look. There is a already prepared, piled up bonfire ready to burn. So at the snap of Mr. Lightning's fingers, you can have a huge forest fire or multiple forest fires that coalesce into one. And then everything changes. So, I think one of you can talk more about, like, let's say the massive forest fires in not just in California but also in Texas.
Well, yeah, and James, actually, you've had fire. I think you're in California, is that, or somewhere nearby there? Is that right?
Yes. Usually the forest fires. Well, sometimes you can see them on the horizon, but luckily between where I'm at and where the fires are, there's a lot of Sierra Mountains in the region that really block that from coming all the way down here. But most of that is due to a mixture of things. One of them definitely the extreme heat, and there's a lot, and I mean a lot of forest out here. It's very diverse because I live in a desert. It's a valley, but right exterior of the valley, there's a mountain that's just the beginning of a plateau, and there's a gigantic forest atop that mountain, and it'll snow up there, even though it'll get like 110 degrees down here. It'll snow in the mountain because like I'm right at the beginning of where the Colorado desert begins, and it's just nothing but desert beyond that. So we get this beautiful picturesque view of the mountains. Beyond that, there's a lot, and I mean a lot of forest up there, and that ends up going ablaze at times because of just the large amount of unkempt forestry that goes dry, and there's just nothing but a bunch of kindling everywhere. And some years ago, we used to have controlled fires, but they legislated that out of existence.
Yeah, that's
since,
stupid.
Yeah, since then, we've basically had a number of basically every year there's fires around the same time.
That's climate change.
And it also shows you an aspect of culture there as well, because it was our culture for a very long time to collect all that loose brush and burn it up. And now it's just fire season after fire season. Now, granted, the fires in general are good for the soil, and over time they do help repopulate the local ecology very well. But it's not too good for a lot of the wildlife as well as human beings as well. In fact, it reminds me of an old tale I heard some time ago of how those tribe of Native Americans, where their primary hunting habits or their primary practice of hunting would be to cause large fires and just burn down whole swaths of forestry to get the deer to run out. And unfortunately, this brought a number of species. Well, basically killed off a large number of species. So, you know, unchecked unchecked ecology can bring mass devastation like that, because these fires, you know, they displace homes, and they definitely cull a lot of creatures, and a lot of it is simply because it's super duper hot here. Because a lot of the fires are naturally caused as well by lightning or by some means of heat. Like, it's not that uncommon for nature itself to spark up a flame, and the flames begin. So it's definitely an interesting experience, an interesting thing to see every single year. It become a continuous seasonal event. And who knows what the long-term ramifications are, but I could tell you, if man was not there to tend it, these fires would happen, and it would be completely natural and underneath completely natural law. Remove man, remove anybody's interference. These fires would happen every single year, and I could only imagine, before the intervening of man, what kind of place this would be, or how the animals would react to these all natural fires occurring. And that alone actually gets my mind jogging to explore that, because just like all things within literature and life, there's a rabbit hole waiting for you to just go down. And I think just the long-term effects of fire seasons is an interesting one that I might dive down myself in the near future.
I love the fact that we're going in this direction. You're talking about it from a fantasy viewpoint or from an Earth viewpoint. There is an elemental energy. There is a reason that our ancestors and the old ones, and to a certain extent us today, still in many cultures and many religions around the world, still have a worship of the fire and water, air, rain, those gods. There's a reason why they were so terrified and tried to appease them, because there is an elemental fury about them. There is something so extraordinary about the event when you go outside and you see the clouds rolling towards you. I wrote about it on my Substack, seeing the cold front coming in and the winds coming ahead of it. You could hear it before it gets there. The song of the trees as it rips through those hollows where all of the ancient oaks and the larches are, and they're just rippling with the wind. You can't describe it as any other way but awe-inspiring. These things are elemental, and they sometimes have their own entities in our stories, not only of our literature, but in the stories of the old ones. This is why it's so extraordinarily important to read your folklore, to read your history, to talk to people who have been there, because they will tell you of things that happened before we had boxes that kept us cool all day long, or that warmed us when we had it. Nothing, certainly, I think that when we talk about, the heat and the forest being colder, nothing affected me. I've been in fires. We talked about the fires, the fact that yes, the earth has to be tended by fire itself in order for many plants to thrive. There's a thing called serotonin, and the seeds explode when they're heated. It helps the trees to replant themselves, to reseed themselves. So many of the forests that we had prior to us stopping all of the fires were open underneath these large trees. It would come through every year, and it would burn off the duff, which is what the needles are called. It would burn off the duff, and the new seedlings would rise up. Those little trees, some of them would survive, but most of them would get wiped out the next time a big fire would come through, leaving the largest trees, the old growth, with these open areas underneath them. And part of forest management is to allow a certain amount of fire to happen, but you have to clear away the unnatural deadwood. You have to take it out, or you'll burn down the entire forest. So a forest that is naturally has been left to its own devices, an old growth forest that has been protected so it didn't have all of these things grow up, has open spaces underneath it. And the soil is anchored by these large, magnificent trees. And you may have a few understory trees that grow underneath them that are in a nursery of trees, so to speak. But you don't have this massive undergrowth in most forests that have been left to their natural devices. As man comes in, and as we start to clear away things, and the brush comes back heavier because we didn't allow a fire to happen, we didn't let it come and take out that little deadwood. Now the brush becomes larger and larger, it becomes heavier and heavier, and it's more fuel. We call this a fuel load. It's actually what happens when we tend our fires out here. We talk about fuel load and whether that fuel is dry or not. When we have heavy undergrowth, it's not just grass and it's not just a few little twigs. It's a bush that's years old, that has thick branches, and now it can burn faster and hotter and longer. And so now it will catch the old trees on fire. It doesn't just flash through and ripple through the whole place and be gone like a cleansing fire. It is that fire that stays and it rages for hours or days and it takes down everything. Once that happens, the mountainside starts to erode. That's when the mudslides occur because the trees are gone. There is nothing holding the soil there, and massive changes take place with that. When you're talking fire suppression, when you're talking about natural fires, there is a difference. And when we decided, oh, we're not going to stop the fires, we're just going to let them burn. Well, you have to clear out that underbrush first. You can't just leave it there and then let the fire come and get it. It will destroy that habitat. It will destroy that place. These elemental forces of fire, connected to the other elemental forces of nature, worst fire I ever fought was started by lightning after a drought. The first winds came through and the leaves started to scatter, and we're like, what's happening? And it was the wind coming in ahead of the front. Well, I knew it was coming in. I'd already prepared for it, and it was a blue norther, is what we call it here in Texas. It was in September, but it was actually coming in. Had this 2011, a dark layer of clouds coming in, and it's blowing this around, and it's still so dry that the leaves are rattling, and I have dead pastures all around me, just a dead, dry grass. There's no green grass left. And I'm at church, and the tones drop, and it's a lightning strike. A lightning strike is lit one tiny place just down from my church. By the time I get in my car and I start to answer this call, it has turned into a raging fire that covers almost a mile. It's behind my house. And as I drive up to my house, I see the trees on the backside of my property, almost 1,000 feet away, with candles exploding out of the top. The dry cedars going up as if they're being torched by some sort of unknown elemental dragon. You can just see the flames roaring up. And this is backlighting my house. I have to break into my house because I didn't have the keys because they left. Get the keys for the fire truck, drive the fire truck. And I had to drive my truck with my team of men that I would pick up on the way, with horses scattering and everybody panicking and people trying to get out of the way. We have to go back and we have to fight this fire. And it's one of the only pictures I actually have of myself with a team of men that I always worked with, because I don't take photos when I'm working. I don't do that. I'm busy. It's me with that team of men who helped save my life and helped save my family and helped save my house from this elemental, incredible force of nature that I wasn't sure I could stop it, that was burning away everything.
And that's where that go ahead. I'm sorry.
This day, it's a trauma of mine that I look up and I look for smoke. Those trees are still back there. Some of them are still standing, the bones of the trees, because I had these 200, 300-year-old oaks on the backside of my property. And we have to be careful because they'll occasionally drop a branch, and we can't really cut them down because they're so heavy and so huge that we don't have the equipment to do it. So we just have to keep waiting for it. It sheds off, and it reminds me that this is the way the earth works. This is how we live, and sometimes how we die is because we're living in this extraordinary, dangerous environment that we call Earth.
You said something there that intrigued me. Well, all of it was very intriguing and magnificent story.
Oh, yeah.
But when you said, it seemed alive, it reminded me of this one time during a thunderstorm, which we rarely get. The storm was right overhead, and the lightning was right overhead, very close. And I remember just going outside with my little dog, and I looked up, and when the lightning, I've never seen it that close, the lightning would or I think it was the thunder, because lightning's when it's coming down, right? When it hits the ground, that's the lightning. Thunder is when it's okay. So it's thunder, to be specific. I'd see the thunder overhead, and it would look like this gigantic. Two ways I'd see it, because there's a heavy overcast of clouds, and when I couldn't see it directly, it looked like a gigantic white snake slithering overhead.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And when I could see it, it looked like a gigantic crack in reality for a split second, like it was just gonna boom, crack open.
Almost like a hand with 1,000 fingers.
So that's why I said earlier it could be very Lovecraftian, as in the this mysterious awe that's just before
Weather
you.
is the OG Cthulhu.
Yes. If we didn't have all this knowledge we did about what weather is, what lightning is, what fire is, to encounter it, to be up close, to this strange thing, it's very alien in itself and yet all natural. So like that was something that you kind of sparked in me, is just the absolute awe and majesty, as well as this this hint of extraordinary power that you just see before you, and it makes you feel small, and it makes you just stand there and look at it and wonder if this is alive, because it moves like it's alive, it seems like it's alive, but it's energy, and there's so much there to pull from for writers to help bring their worlds to life. I think weather and climate is the number one way to help fashion your world. If you're having questions of, what do my people do on the daily? Well, what is the daily weather like? Mix it with their amount of technology and what they may think of it. To see fire like that, to see thunder cast overhead like that, you'd ponder if there's a being more magnificent and bigger than anything behind it, and it was the will of the gods. And a lot of people have not had that experience, and they all experience is lost, and they replace it with knowledge and say, well, it's just fire, it's just thunder, it's just lightning, we've seen the videos. But have you been underneath
That's
a
right.
storm like that?
Have you felt it?
Have you felt the heat
Or the rain?
Yeah, exactly. All of it is very I think it's very important to any story, because you can really challenge a character or bring a world to life or do 1,000 different things with it. It's almost like clay for a writer. It's this thing you can turn to continuously ramp up the stakes. Can it get worse? Well, it could start downpouring rain right now. So there's so much there that's magnificent about it, especially when you brought up Black Knight in your local legends, that they'd bring them to life. They'd refer to them as individuals.
Yeah,
exactly. And I understand that when you actually experience it, it's like you can absolutely see how people could think of them as entities.
Yeah, it's one of the many interesting, but almost like marvelously interesting things that all across the world, that you have this, as you both mentioned, that in the early cultural growth, you have this deification of the weather. And let's say if you go, you don't have to stay in Greece to know that if you go somewhere else, like for example in Japan, there will be a thunder god. There will be something. Yeah, there will be some god connected with thunder, rain, winds, gale winds, and such, and fire, of course. So, but coming back to the way that you could viscerally feel your characters like changing environment is to pit your characters and the villains. Why not pit the villains against the weather? And of course, the weather dictates how the biome that the story is taking place is acting. So, let's say you are in a desert, but suddenly there is a storm. There is there is just like a distant, powerful storm, and you see the lightning, you see the thunder, you hear it, and and you know better than me what happens in the desert with gale winds. You get sandstorms. These sandstorms sometimes can literally rip the skin of your body. Um, they can suffocate you, drown you with sand, or you go to the forest. Let's say how I first learned how to write it many years ago, with one of the first stories about Lily and Snow. You've read it. How she manages to survive on her colony, because she knows how to survive. She's lived there. She knows the weather, so to speak. She knows everything, and even though she knows it, she still suffers. She has to, because she's denied the leisure of just going into the forest when she wants, and going out of the forest when she likes, because she is chased by enemies. And so what does she do? She knows she can survive the weather, but those who never been there, and well, they're not inept. They're not totally like inept, but they have no idea about that, like the quirks of the weather there and the environment, and they may be overconfident in their stuff, their gadgets, their technology, just like we have grown quite overconfident. Yeah, I'm living in this huge home with multiple stories and AC and plumbing, etc., etc. And then the flood comes, and your home is gone. So yeah, we have to remember that even though we consider ourselves masters of Earth, it's actually Earth who is the master. The weather is the master. Yeah.
We don't talk about it as often. The monsters of the earth, the weather, the elementals that force us to fight back, force us to try to survive. It shows up frequently in Norse mythology. The cold, and you mentioned it. And of course, I've seen a lot of extraordinary weather events in my time, just because I'm so thrilled to be out there, to be looking at all of these different events. But the one that sticks with me probably the most actually is the cold spell that we had in Texas in 2021. We weren't prepared for that level of cold, and I actually had known about it was coming for several weeks. We knew that it would be getting cold. We warned people it's probably going to get down to at least 5 degrees. It went further down than that. The models did not properly predict it. It's not nothing against our meteorologists. You can't know everything, but cold is sometimes hard to model because it has so many dynamics in place. Cold air is heavy. It sinks. It rolls faster. Sometimes it comes in harder, and it brings with it the North Pole. It actually, this monstrous wind that howls, freezes everything. So as I watch this front come in, as I watch this massive polar vortex descend on our area, and the people they did what they could. They thought they would be ready, much like the people of Appalachia did everything they could, thinking they would be ready. Nobody's prepared for the wall of water that comes down from the top of the mountain. And nobody was prepared for below zero temperatures. We're not prepared for that. So as our above ground all of our utilities were above ground. They're up because that's where we put them. Because the soil is hard and dry here. You don't just sink everything. It's like chopping through bricks in the summer. So you put it up on poles and you stream. Well, we had almost an inch of ice that fell. And then 18 inches of snow was unexpected. And we look around, suddenly our power's out and there's no lights. I still have water because I have a sufficient system. But I'm starting to hear about my neighbors. They're running out of power. They're running out of heat. There's nowhere for them to go. They don't have, they may have a fireplace, but they're older and they don't have that much wood, just a little bit, because everybody's relying on heat. Thank God that I had actually had a fire earlier just that year, and it had taken out my entire heating and cooling system. As a result, I'd had to make do with putting in little air conditioners in each room, and in putting my wood heater to use. So I had a full load of wood to chop. Now the pipes are bursting because the pipes are only about 1.5 feet down.
Yeah,
Water
and they
is
froze. Yeah.
Yes, and this is not just a cold snap. This is day below zero temperatures. The cold is an insidious monster. It doesn't just show up and suddenly.
I know it too well.
It creeps. Yes, it does. It creeps in. It creeps into everything. It's like a ghost. You can't see it, but you can hear it. It's coming. It starts to crack things. The walls start to move. And so the pipes started to break. Now there's no water. For the next 2 weeks, we will go without water and we'll go without power. We will have no way to see. And it's so dark outside so much of the time because the snow and the ice are falling. Now it's an entirely different world. We go outside every day because we have to take care of the animals. Breaking the ice.
Planet. Yeah.
Just trying to keep the animals watered. Every time you turn around, there's the cold is attacking something. It is a monster at that point. It's not just relief from the heat. It's a monster now. It has its own face. It has its own entity. You can't see it, but it's coming in behind you. By the time you get finished breaking the ice for the cows and the chickens and the goats, you turn around and now you have to go back and break it again. And they're trying to drink and it's too cold to drink. So you have to keep on trying to get it out where they can drink it, and it's freezing them. You have to have a place for them to get warm and hide. Well, we have to come back in and be warm, but there's a problem. The power went out. I fell asleep. It's in the middle of the night, and the fire goes out. Now that fire that I fight all the time, that elemental that I tried to keep from destroying my house, is now my best friend. And I've been tending it, making sure it's going every 2 hours, checking it, but I fell asleep. My son woke up and the house is freezing now. It's now below freezing in the house. We're cold. I wake up, I've been up all this time. And he comes and he's desperately trying to start this fire. Our hands are getting colder and colder. Our feet are starting to get cold. Our hands are shaking. We have the fire. We have wood. We have something to start it with. But our hands are shaking. It's hard to get going. And it's the first time I ever thought I'm going to die, not because I had a fire, but because we got too cold. And we became hypothermic and died. And there's nowhere to go now. My husband actually had a warming station at the church. We had heat because we had the propane, but I can't get there. The roads are covered in ice and we're separated now. He couldn't come home for days. And it's just us trying to light a fire like little match girl. And the snow is coming down and it keeps getting darker and darker. And then the spark lights and the fire comes back. And the enemy that I'd fought so hard all those years ago is saving my life now. Because I have a place for it to stay in my life. Each element has its purpose, and it can be a monster or it can be a friend. We don't know which one it's going to be, but each has its own place and its own mastery in our world. And we can't always rule everything, but we can try to learn to live with it. And if we learn how, we might actually stay alive. Because if we don't make our peace with the elementals and the monsters of the earth, they will destroy us.
Powerful. Very powerful.
Indeed. But it reminds me of because cold here it's something that we're used to. It gets cold, really cold in the winter. Some winters maybe a little bit on the warm side, but it's like it's even the warmest winter is like minus 20 Celsius. We often get to minus 30 and over sometimes. And if you are somewhere in the mountains with all the like the frost wind, oh boy, it can get like to minus 40 sometimes, like during the coldest winters. And I have experienced that while I was in the army. It's like no amount of clothing, and I'm talking thick clothing with furs, laced it with furs. It's not helping you. It's the longer you stay out, the heavier your clothes get because the frosts it piles in, and you suddenly find yourself like it's like probably after like 30 minutes, maybe even less, you find yourself like fighting for uh, fighting with your own clothing, which is supposed to help you stay warm. It's now your it's slowly becoming, it's slowly turning into a coffin. And you have to break the frost, you have to pat it, uh, or if you're carrying something, let's say a weapon, it soon becomes useless because it's covered in ice. And in some cases we had to like beat the rifles into a tree or a wall, so that like the ice would fall, like would break, and we could like clean them a bit. And I mean, the moving parts were then no longer moving. And we're talking like the notoriously reliable AK. It's it
Oh,
it it transforms into a frozen metal stick.
ugh.
That's it. It's a frozen metal stick. And then you realize that the cold has gotten to you, and you're falling asleep while you're walking, while you're standing, and you're falling asleep, and you're desperately trying to keep yourself awake. And because it's like minus 30 plus, between minus 30 and minus 40, like depends on how much wind you get. And you can't even, at some instances, you can't even breathe, because when you breathe in the air, it's frozen air, and it burns your mouth, it burns your throat, and it actually causes you pain.
Yes.
And not to mention the ice. Oh boy, it's it's not amusing. And there are places which are much colder, like the poles, or I think the Appalachian, like during winter time, they are much colder than that. So, like you said, cold is now the enemy. Now you need that other monster, fire. So yeah, it's
The frost giants and the fire giants battling each
yeah,
other. The elementals
pretty much.
of Earth. It's extraordinary to read these stories as we go back and read our original stories, the folklores of peoples, and the words of the old ones. These stories are so incredibly important, and it's important to try to get them in their original forms if you can. Hearing your people talk about it, if you can find an old person somewhere, ask them about the weather when they were young. Now, the truth is, most of them have started growing up in the age of air conditioning. That happens in the 1930s. but we don't know how they lived before then. A lot of us don't have any clue as to how they actually survived. And when we talk about survival in cold weather, or we talk about survival in the heat, and both of you actually have extremes, it's incredible, because I know that if I asked James in a minute, how did they survive? How did they deal with the heat? How did you talk to those people? I know a little bit about both. Texas has a tendency to swing between the two. We certainly, the coldest it got this winter was, I think, 10 below, that winter when it was so cold, was 10 below zero, which for us is extraordinary, because that's simply not, this environment doesn't usually occur that way. But with extremes of any kind, people still survived back then. How did they do it? How did they survive this, where you're out in the woods and it's 1700 and you've got your musket and a wool coat? The reason they did it is because they were wearing all wool. Wool becomes warm when it's wet. When you sweat into it, now the truth is it's still going to freeze, and that's what you're talking about, where it starts to freeze when you sweat and it literally becomes stiff and you have to move against it. These stories of how the old ones survived these extremes in weather can help you write a better story now, because knowing those little pieces of information, the fact that your AK is going to freeze at some point unless you can do a certain things to keep it from happening, and that happen, it's still going to become locked up. Each weapon has a breaking point where it gets too cold or it gets too hot, and it's really not going to function the way it needs to. It was, as we're writing, if you have a fantasy world, you can kind of sort of work around it, but even then, if your characters are cold, their equipment and their gear is cold too. And that, so much of it depends also on moisture. I was actually able to look at chat for just a second there, because I was able to blow it all up big enough for me to look at it, because of my eyes being the way they are. And Gran was talking about how hay bales will spontaneously combust when there's too much moisture. That heats up, and just blow up. And we've actually, I know, Gran, my heart's with you, fought a fire several times where we have one of the worst hay bale fires ever. That was the one time I nearly died actually on a fire scene, was that I had a hay bale. I was trying to pull it apart and I fell back, and it actually fell on me, the burning part of the hay bale, and it was on my knees down, and I had to push it away really quick, and I was surrounded by burning hay bales. It happened because the moisture was so high, and you have hot weather, and the moisture in the grass becomes it starts to compost it on the inside, literally heats up and will just spontaneously combust. Imagine being a farmer and it's been dry and everything's good, and you're laying your grass down and it looks like it's dry enough, and you've spread it all out, because there's a way to do it. There's a way to do it. Hey, you don't just roll it up. You have to spread it all out, let it cure, and then you roll it up into a hay bale and you think everything's okay. And it just blows up. Those little fairies of the elements that sometimes we think of the monster as being huge, it's big, the giant towering thunderhead, and the lightning, and the fire that looms up, or the cold north wind that blows everything down. But sometimes it's this little tiny elemental fairy that you can't even see, called moisture, that just lights it up. The little gremlin that you weren't expecting, that comes behind you as you're working, and suddenly everything's wrong, everything's torn apart, and there's fires, or there's something else happening, and you're like, how does this even take place? When you don't have science to tell you what it is, you start to create a system for explaining this thing. And that's where we get so many of our stories of the fairies spoiling the crops, and how the farmers had to make sure that they put out things at a certain time, and they would look to see the moon is a certain way, and that you have to have, if you have a ring around the moon, that moisture's coming, you don't want to do it then. You don't want to put your hay up then, because it's going to rain on it and it's going to cause this problem. So there's so many of these legends that are being lost. A great place to find them actually is in the Farmer's Almanac, the original Farmer's Almanac. Going to it, and it actually has those old tables of planting by the moon or planting by certain ways, of repeating these stories and finding them. When you learn those things, you start to learn a lot about the elemental forces of nature that sometimes are harder to see. When the last frost comes, knowing when the first warm spring day is going to happen. Those little tiny parts of our history that are being whittled away by the modern age, that we're losing these things, could mean the difference between life and death. Especially when the power goes out and your cell phone goes down and you don't even know how to keep time anymore. You don't even have a watch that works without the internet.
You don't have a mechanical watch. Yeah,
that's right. And so
I would argue, by the way, that the way you described it, I would argue that this was their science. I mean, they had to explain how the stuff worked, and that was their science. I mean, it's considered superstitious, silly superstitious to us, but this is exactly how they survived.
Yes.
Yeah, because they observed the weather, they observed nature, they saw how things happened, they gave them an explanation, and that explanation was how their ancestors knew what to do, and how they survived.
Yes. That the line between folklore and superstition is a very fine one. There are places in our worlds and in our lives where we create situations that don't need to happen when we do things that are the wrong entirely. And not everything the old people said was a good choice. They sometimes got it wrong, but you're right. This was their science. This was their way of passing it on. That ability to story tell. So much of the stories they told, so much of the legacy of the griot, of the person who told the stories by the fire and taught it in such a way that the younger children would remember it word for word. It was designed to keep people alive. They would tell these stories about the fairies or the gods because they wanted people to know how to survive a storm, or how to plant the crop at the right time, or the way that things were before this magical time we're living in now, where we actually have caves to live in instead of just having to run across the open savanna. These stories are gold, and they are not to be disrespected just because they're not scientific, in quotes. They are the legacy of generations. What they got right, give them the credit for it. What they got wrong, leave it to God, because we don't need to lose it just because it's not science. These things that they have given us, the lives that were lost just to tell you what kind of fruit to eat. Can you imagine the horror of picking up a piece of fruit and thinking that you could eat it and finding out it's poison? You and I, actually, we had that in our game that night where we had to go try to find a piece of fruit. These people suffered and died, and the ones that lived told the story. Give them the grace of being able to tell you the story. Find those stories, read them. The folklore has the answers to so many of these mysteries of the elements, the wind and the rain and the storms. Those people that lived in your area, the Tawakana that lived here, knew how to handle the fires on the prairie. The Karankawa that lived on the coast of Texas, the Native Americans that lived there, knew not to be down by the sea during certain times of year. They knew when it got so still that you could feel the moisture in the air, you could cut it with a knife, that it was time to leave. That still hot days mean that a storm may be coming. The worst storm that we've had so many bad storms, and we forget that people used to die by the thousands. Upwards of possibly 40,000 people died in Galveston, Texas in the early 1900s due to just 2 hurricanes. And the bodies piled up so high because the ocean came ashore. They had built their houses down there. They didn't realize that the Karankawa, who knew how to leave, they wanted to see the ocean, and they didn't realize, because they hadn't been here long enough to know, that when the earth heats up and certain cycles occur, that these monster hurricanes would come. And the Galveston hurricane is one of the most horrific natural disasters to ever take place, with, like I said, death rates possibly a size 40,000 or more. And we don't think of the earth as being that brutal all this time, but it was. The Indians knew, the Karankawa knew not to do this. If we have access to these stories, we need to go back and look at it, because they're telling you what life was like before. They're telling you what the earth was like and the weather was like. You would know what it's like. So when your little box maybe finally stops working, when the lights go out, you can walk outside and have a story in your heart that somebody fought and died for and struggled to give to their children. That story, even if it's 1,000 years old, may be the key to your survival and someone else's.
Oh yeah, that's definitely something which I'm actually looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I have like I'm always doing some research for a story. Um, and I have amassed like a couple of folders that I am yet to find the time to read. but some of them have old stories that other people have collected. Like some are from the times when the Bulgarians settled here, and they started like intermingling with the Slavs. And they, of course, the first thing was that they exchanged stories, and that knowledge, it's like that was exchanged, and you have these, like, because they are coming from the steppes, and the weather is different there, and the Slavs are living here, and they have their forests, and suddenly it's like a clash of ways of life, ways of survival. That one, it's not that they are useless, but um, they have to learn. Like the Slavs had to learn how is it was in the steppes, where you don't have any forests, and when the terrible storm comes, like you can't just hide somewhere. You have to survive it outside, out in the open, and you have to find a way to survive it. And sometimes these storms, they are monstrous, and you have multiple lightnings falling down, hitting the earth, and they had this, like, they are shamans who actually used some form of a primitive lightning rods. And when they had, like, these were sacred items, and when that huge storm happened, they would know from the older shamans. They would know the signs, and they would instruct the warriors to cast down their, like, armor, their swords, their spears, because they would. You don't have any trees. Like the lightning will just aim at you. You're wearing conductive. You're dressed in metal, basically, and they would even, like, they had these organized groups that would dig holes and put the armor inside the holes and cover it. So because it was expensive as fuck, and then it took long time to make, and some of these weapons, they were considered like holy, so they couldn't just throw them away. And yeah, that's part of the stuff that I have sitting, just waiting for me to read it.
Oh, not
And I had this terrible little guy poking at me for
Yes.
half the stream right here, trying to get me to play with him.
Oh,
But,
Begging for
you-
pets.
yes, basically always asking for attention, whining. He's a little force of nature himself. But one interesting thing, you actually asked the question, what do the natives do down here? So we're talking about the past. Over here, they during the hot seasons, the cool seasons, it was beautiful. You look at like 75 degrees, which is a decent temperature, good for it's like a spring temperature. But what they would do is actually avoid the heat, avoid doing anything during the blistering hours of the day, and just doing everything towards the late afternoon until the early morning. Everything was done at night because it was just too hot. So what they would do is they would lay down in their little structures, and they would take palm tree leaves, because they got a lot of them. This dog's very comfortable right here.
yeah.
They got palm tree leaves, and they would dip them in water, put them overhead, and sleep underneath the palm tree leaves as the leaves slowly release the water on top of them, and that's how they spend their days, just sleeping. And then everything's done in the late evening until the early morning because it's just too hot. You can't do much. There are some locations around here where the wind constantly blows. They call them the Santa Ana winds.
Yes.
And they would often move to those locations during the hotter seasons because the blowing winds would definitely help a lot with that. But yeah, it's like weather is beyond important. It's life or death. It is that constant threat and that thing you always got to work around with no matter what. And I think what we've been exploring this entire time, because we're almost done here already, only like 9 minutes until we're all done here. And what we've been exploring is the devastation of weather, what weather is, how to use weather in writing, and ultimately, I think the one thing is how it affects culture, and it demands your local attention because it can devastate everything without certain pieces of information. You want to help build culture. I think a great question to ask yourself is, what is the weather like? What is the kindest weather in the area like? What season is that? And what is the most devastating weather like? And how does the local culture react to that? Because weather is near the core of a culture. It will dictate how a person dresses at times, which shows you the magnificent sway it has over all living things, really. May it be the trees, the animals, or the human beings walking about. Not now, doggy. Weather's going to affect you. This guy wants to play. But weather's going to affect you. Yeah, so it's crazy.
Well, and we haven't even really talked about the fact of how animals actually know when weather's coming in. So look out your door to make sure that he's not trying to warn you. Because we've noticed with our animals, they will actually let us know when weather is coming. Sometimes cows will turn their faces away from the storm as it approaches and stand in the middle of the field, sort of out there. They won't get under the trees. They stand out there by themselves. Let the tree be the one that gets hit by lightning because we're not in the open steppe. And so look to your animals. Talk about that as well in your story, because that actually changed the way that we look at that. But something very powerful that the Black Knight was talking about, and both of you have mentioned this, is embracing where you are. It is part of who you are, is the weather that surrounds you, whether you're in the beautiful tropics and life is balmy and gorgeous, and that is a beautiful place to be. But then the heavy rains come, and you have to be ready for those every day, as the mountainside may crumble on you, or the volcano rumbles in the distance, or you're out in the forest and it's cold and can be very troubling in the winter, but in the summer when it's finally beautiful and everything's wonderful, it's a great place to live. Or you're here on the plains of Texas and the sky's trying to kill you.
Basically.
Literally, yes, the hailstones that are 4 inches in diameter are going to pummel you unless you find a place to hide. That it just suddenly comes down and it can kill you.
That's one thing that's interesting about living here, because we don't get any of that weather specifically because of the mountains. There's a 35-mile wide plateau that basically keeps all good weather from coming down this way. And it's like something you said earlier, you look to your elders and they know, you can learn from them. One thing that I've learned over the years is I could tell when there's a storm coming that's actually going to be bad, because those are the only storms that are powerful enough to make it past the mountains. We don't get hurricanes, but we do get storms from time to time. And you can see it coming because you just look at the mountains and it's just covered in clouds. You're like, okay. And then you look at the mountain covered in clouds, and then you see which direction the wind's blowing. If it's blowing towards you, those clouds are going to be right overhead in a couple of hours. So whatever you got to do, you get it done before they arrive. And the interesting thing is, I don't live in the plains. I'm in a valley and surrounded by mountainscape all around this area. So you don't have as much of a warning either. You have maybe a 6-hour warning at best. Oh yeah. He's like, because the mountains, they're natural barrier for all things. but it creates a very interesting ecological situation down here where it's very warm and hot in the valley, but you go to the mountaintop and you can get snow in the winter. So it's a very very interesting place to live in, to say the least.
Yeah, it's diverse.
Very
That's diverse weather.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I like about my country. That we have um, varied weather, and even though sometimes the cold and the heat could be a bit too much, because we also have and had sweltering hot summers. Um, you can even say that in certain um, instances, the area here can even get the like the rain, sort of a rainy season.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you have at least we don't have fucking hurricanes. So at least that. But we have volcanoes,
Yes.
nipping volcanoes, and one day, if the nearby volcano, it's not going to erupt, it will explode.
Oh wow.
And it will be something like the what was that in the US, the famous
Mount St. Helens.
no, that other thing that Yosemite, was it? I
Oh,
forgot.
You said,
yeah. Yellowstone. It's the
Yeah,
Yellowstone.
yeah, Yellowstone. So if that volcano nearby, it's like it's some kilometers away, but it's not going to erupt. It will explode one
Yes.
day, and the entire city will vanish.
Well, on that, I think we see all these things around us that frighten us so. The beauty of the world turns to suddenly some sort of brutal thing that we can't control, that we don't know it's coming. Life is wonderful and the flowers are blooming, and suddenly you look up and there's a storm. There comes a point in your life where, when you can't run away, when you can't hide, to do just like the soldiers in Black Knight's story do. You throw down the armor, you throw down your sword, and you just embrace the storm. There comes a point where you can't run any further, where you have to throw yourself on the mercy of God and do the best you can to survive. That's when you just turn your face to the sky and look at it and just let it wash over you. The beauty and the terror that is living on this earth. The weather that surrounds us is a part of who we are, and it makes us, it shapes us, it molds us just like it molds the earth. Sometimes you have no choice but just to turn your face to the sky and let the storm wash over you and embrace the storm. And when we do, we join all the ancestors that have gone before us, who in their own time embraced their storms and survived or passed. But there's certainly no shame in joining the earth beneath the hands of the elemental gods that still roam the face.
Indeed.
There you go. And that's a lot of literature we don't see explored that much these days. These stuff that I haven't been exposed to. But we're 1 minute away, probably less. That's where can people find you guys? Black Knight, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Amazon. You can find all of my Star Shattered books, plus my brand new 100% old school fantasy Lord of Bones, and my 2 short story anthologies, the Amended of Sword and Railgun and The Blood of Tyrants, plus my 2 Valen novellas. The Rifle Song, which is the first one, and the second one is Veiling and the Bunker of Death. And you can find me also on Substack. As you all probably know, some of you may be coming from Substack. It's Substack, The Black Knight.
All right, RH Snow, where can people find you?
Well, of course, you can always find me at watcherthedamned.com, where I have my series Watcher the Damned. and where, like I said, Texas is a character and weather is Texas's language. And so we intimately explore all of the ins and outs of the blue northers that roll out of the north, or the fires that will sweep the landscape, the tornadoes that come. And we do have a tornado scene actually in my upcoming book, Caballeros del Camino, which should be hitting the shelves, I hope, within the next 3 weeks. It is out for its final line edit right now. My editor's looking it over. We happen to turn it around. We'll go ahead and format, put our illustrations in, and we should have that on the shelves for you. And it will contain that same scene that I wrote, actually based on my own personal experience from this spring. And because weather is such a huge part of our series and such an important part of the watcher's life, it was such a thrill to be able to talk to you all about this today. I love weather. I love everything about it. It's been in my heart ever since I was a little girl, and my dad would take me outside, and instead of running away and hiding in the storm, we would stand in the middle of it and watch the lightning strike. I encourage you to go out and love your weather, love the world you're living in, experience it, and then pass that knowledge on to everyone around you so they can love this earth too, just as much as you do and as much as I do.
Awesome. And with that, thank you all for joining us, everybody. We truly appreciate you stopping by and saying hi, but we're going to go ahead and respect your time, and we're going to get going. Thanks a lot to everybody. We are out of here. Wrapping up the stream.